Watch this.
You know, there's talk of the lawmakers wrapping up the session this week, which means there's a lot of talk in both chambers trying to get work done. We hit some of the highlights from the State House. The homeless encampment protest has been in place for weeks, trying to bring attention to Idaho's lack of affordable housing options. Now, there's a threat of legal action to end it. But what standing is there for camping? Idaho's Old Pen is turning 150 years old today. We're taking a look back to when Idaho began sending its criminals up the river, outside the city, by the river. People have been moving into the Treasure Valley in record numbers, both before and during the pandemic. The effects of that have been well documented. A shortage of homes available, causing skyrocketing real estate and rental prices, pricing out a lot of people. Then a short-term shutdown of service industries during the pandemic, putting some people out of work, didn't exactly help with affording a place to live. Those two major things have pushed our homeless population to a level we have never seen. And sure, there are other factors at play besides being able to work and afford a home that can contribute to homelessness. Those may be beside the point because at this point, it's a problem in search of a solution. You're probably aware of the homeless encampment on the lawn of the old Ada County Courthouse. Some of the protesters are homeless themselves, others are advocates and supporters. But they're united in the message that Boise lacks affordable housing and low-barrier shelter options. And they've been out there since the middle of January. And just last week, the State House got involved. The governor and attorney general filed a lawsuit against the protesters and a member of Boise Mutual Aid, the group that organized it. We wanted to get a better idea of what this is all about and what the state seeking a court order to end the protest with that happening, because as we've said several times, state law allows these forms of symbolic protest, but the actual act of camping is illegal. Andrew Bartline is at the old Ada County Courthouse. And Andrew, you spoke with the attorney representing the protesters today, and it sounds like this isn't so black and white. Like this is a question of camping. It sounds like there's a precedent that adds to the confusion.
Yeah, well, we'll first start with the injunction we got from the Attorney General's office last week. Now, they cite the state's ability to regulate the act of camping through a 2013 court precedent. That was Waters versus Otter. That was during the Occupy Boise movement. Now, this state law banning camping is very similar to a former city of Boise law that did the same thing. A 2019 court precedent struck down that Boise law, said it was unconstitutional and in violation of the 8th Amendment. Now, that's your protection against cruel and unusual punishment. Now, the logic behind this, the protester's attorney, he also served as the lead attorney in that 2019 court precedent, is that these are on similar grounds. Now, if you ban a homeless person from camping, well, they're homeless. They may not have anywhere else to go. So the ban isn't really on camping itself. The ban in practice turns out to be a ban on just being homeless.
The government cannot punish homeless people for the status of being homeless. They can't make it illegal for people who are just they're just human. They're, you know, everybody sleeps. They need to sleep. They need to eat. They need to keep warm from the elements. These are ordinary things. They need to have a bathroom. There's, you know, that's what the state is attempting to do here. They are dehumanizing the homeless population.
Now, that 2019 court precedent, it's important to keep in mind, it's only relevant if the homeless shelter systems around here are full and there's no availability, there's no capacity. Think Interfaith Sanctuary, the Boise Rescue Mission system as well, and that is measured by the capacity at these local homeless shelters. Now, the injunction says the state confirmed with the Boise Rescue Mission, again, this is in the injunction, that there were available beds when they filed that lawsuit. That's something we've reported as well. But Jody Peterson-Steigers, the executive director at Interfaith Sanctuary, that's the low barrier shelter here in Boise, she says that a bed may be open, it might be available, but that does not mean that that bed is accessible. On some of the coldest nights, Interfaith Sanctuary may have to turn up to 20 people away. That's something we reported previously this past winter, and those people have to go somewhere. She says sometimes those people can't get into the mission.
On any given night that we don't have enough beds, we call the rescue mission. We call both the men's and the women's shelter, and we give them the list of names that we don't have space for. And they very kindly say, these guests can stay with us, these guests cannot. And that's always been our relationship, and we have never questioned the decision-making of their shelter. We respect how they make that decision, but in fact, on any given night that we can't find space, there is not necessarily a bed for that person at the rescue mission. And it's okay, we just need to be honest about that.
Now, Peterson-Steigers adds that the need for their services are growing. They can't help everyone in need, and if these people can't find help at the rescue mission either, again, there's nowhere else for them to go. They're homeless people. They have all their belongings with them. They really don't have any other choice. Brian?
Well, and as you notice right behind Andrew there, last week ISP came in and kind of cleaned out some of the trash and stuff that goes along with camping there. But as you can see, they are still there and likely will be until we get some sort of court ruling on this case. Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, lawmakers are hoping this is the last week of the legislative session. They're aiming to adjourn by Friday, the 75th day of the session. But there's still a whole lot of bills out there and budgets to get through before they can do that, like dozens. Over in the House this morning, lawmakers took up Senate Bill 1404. It would give a one-time bonus of $1,000 to full-time public school administrators, staff, and other classified positions. That nearly $36 million would be funded by ARPA. And it passed the Senate last week 28-5. Today, it was on the House floor for debate. Well, not everyone was on board with the idea.
This is an opportunity to show our public school instruction staff that we are grateful for the sacrifices they've made the last few years to keep our kids in school.
Having worked with many of these administrative assistants, they're not just doing their jobs anymore. The situations that we've put them in, they tend to be doing their jobs and about 1.5 other people's jobs.
My biggest concern with this is that we're spending ARPA funds, which is supposed to be the funds that we're investing in our future, right? And we're giving one-time bonuses to teachers for work they've already done.
Giving $1,000 to admin staff does not seem like the best way to spend our monies. If we have extra money to start giving all administration staff $1,000, why aren't we putting that into the students or the schools themselves? It just doesn't make sense to me that we're giving admin staff bonuses now for doing their job.
For just doing their job. Okay, well, they are giving money to the schools. Wondering if Representative Scott has read the job descriptions of school administration staff, and I wonder if that description includes COVID and all that comes with it. Probably not. Regardless, it's also worth pointing out Representative Scott voted to approve a 3% pay increase for herself and the rest of her colleagues, raising her base pay $560 from $18,691 a year to $19,251 a year. We'll now see if Governor Little agrees with these bonuses. Well, last week we heard very little debate from the House on the state's higher education budget after what was an explosive one over the funding last year. Today, the Senate took up the budget, $643 million for Idaho's 4 public universities, the largest spending increase for higher education in state history. Part of that budget, about $4 million, is going to come from the University Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund, specifically from Boise State's account. That money will be used to help cover the cost of raises. By taking money from that fund, it will make sure that universities do not have to increase tuition, at least for another year.
We're asking our universities to use their rainy day funds at a time when it's not raining in this state. We have record surplus.
I will say it's a patch for an ongoing hole in a budget with one-time funds. We will have to come back and revisit this.
That one-time $2.5 million budget that was cut from last year's budget based on critical race theory claims was not added back into this year's budget. That is despite independent audits from both Boise State University and University of Idaho showed that CRT, not a thing, not an issue in those schools. Senators called this budget a compromise, passing it 30-5. Again, it awaits Governor Little's signature. Idaho's wildland firefighters getting paid more will likely be a welcomed bump and is expected to help with firefighter retention. We apparently lose nearly 40% of our wildland firefighters after 2 years because we haven't offered hazard pay like other agencies. This morning, the Senate unanimously agreed to increase starting pay for state wildland firefighters to $15 an hour and then add a 25% increase for hazard pay for those actually fighting a fire.
Here we have people who are working on the fire lines and in high personal risk, and we are losing them to other states because our base pay is closer to a fast food burger flipper than it is to someone who is a professional at and taking a high risk personal risk to be in their job.
No offense to a burger flipper, but if this bill sounds familiar, it's because last week the feds raised their minimum wage for federal lands firefighters to $15 an hour, meaning if this bill is signed, it will put state firefighters' pay on par with federal firefighters, and it will go into effect for this fire season. For the first time in decades, Idaho is about to have a 4-party primary election instead of the usual 2. The deadline to file as an affiliated candidate was March 11th, but for those that missed that deadline, they could still file as a write-in candidate. That deadline is this Friday, March 25th. We now know of at least 2 known names who want to be write-in candidates for governor. There's Sandpoint Mayor Shelby Rongstad, who, when he tried to file 2 Fridays ago, was denied because his party affiliation didn't match his filing paperwork, according to the Secretary of State's office. In a Facebook post this morning, Rongstad said he was denied access onto the ballot based on a minor technicality, he called it, not based on law. He said, quote, "I've determined our best option is to file a write-in campaign to better represent the people of Idaho. Should he file on time and be approved, he would be on the Democratic ticket as a write-in candidate on the May primary ballot." Then there's Dr. Ryan Cole, who's in a similar situation. The Secretary of State's office confirmed this afternoon he has filed as a write-in candidate for the Constitution Party. Dr. Cole also had a mix-up with his paperwork where he filed to run for governor under the Constitution Party, but his registration was unaffiliated, so his application was also denied. Dr. Cole is now a write-in candidate for the May primary, which is 57 days away. It was in use for 101 years and kept more than 13,000 criminals in check. The story of how it all started with 11 men locked up in Idaho's territorial prison. Lock this number into your contacts list, 208-321-5614. That's how you can be part of the 208 conversation. Text us your clean, concise, and clever messages about anything we've talked about on the 208. Or maybe you have an idea of what we should be talking about. Send those too. And don't forget, include your name and the hashtag, the 208. We could share yours at the end of the show. Hope springs eternal, and spring is the time of plans and projects. You probably heard those pretty inspirational seasonal quotes before. Kind of gives us an idea of the hope of spring, which usually hits, historically, anywhere from March 19th through the 21st. However, I'm not sure that promise of hope really hit home when spring hit in 1872, at least not for the occupants of Idaho's territorial prison. March 21st, 1872 was the first full day of spring back then, and that day, 11 men were being moved out of their shaky wooden structure in Idaho City to a bigger, more secure territorial prison. You see, convict escapes were common back then, but the hopes of ducking out of your sentence early were being dashed by having to be housed within the stone-cold surroundings of Idaho's old penitentiary, which was brand new on this day 150 years ago. For decades,
it's dark history.
The Old Idaho Penitentiary has drawn the interest of those attracted to atrociousness.
And true crime, of course, that is a huge thing that people are into.
And there aren't too many places that were built back then that are still around.
Exactly, yeah.
Anthony Perry's job is to teach people about this place.
And try to humanize it.
Which takes us back to the beginning. The Idaho Territory was barely into its adolescence, the population around 15,000 and climbing. More people meant more opportunity for crime, and more space needed for those convicted of said crimes.
The original territorial prison was in Idaho City, and in 1869 they decided to bring it here to this location.
This location happened to be a stone's throw from a sufficient supply of sandstone.
So they thought, we've got building material. They started construction, actually broke ground in April of 1870.
And they invited the public to be present, apparently. According to a notice in the Idaho Statesman, then considered a radical paper, a general attendance is requested in order that all may view the commencement of an edifice that may someday be their home, where the moral atmosphere inside the walls is a far higher tone than that of the rest of the territory. Anyway, construction commenced by local workmen,
who were paid about $4 to $6 a day to construct that territorial prison.
And the cornerstone was laid, ironically, on Independence Day, 1870.
And in March of 1872, the first 11, arrived here from Idaho City, from the Boise County Jail.
Those men?
Murder, grand larceny, so the violent federal crimes that were being committed in the territory of Idaho.
Were all housed in this one building.
There were 14 cells per tier, and they faced opposite directions, so 7 here, 7 there, 3 tiers. In the 1880s, that doubled.
That decade saw the first woman inmate as well as its youngest.
The youngest was actually a 10-year-old. His name was James Oscar Baker.
He was convicted of killing E.T. Williams in Soda Springs. Those early days also saw the security get tested.
So within the first month of the territorial prison opening up, so in April of 1872, we had our very first escape. This guy named Al Priest, he was in on a highway robbery on a 15-year sentence. He's outside kind of stacking rock.
Inside, another prisoner named Ahud is cleaning dishes.
And Al asked for a sip of water, and so he goes inside. He's got a ball and chain on, like all these men, because there's no fence, there's no wall, and so he goes inside and he finds a pair of keys. He unshackles his ankle, he climbs up and out a window and takes off. And Ahud sees this happen. He takes the key, unshackles himself, follows, and they both escape. They both make a run for it. Al Priest was reportedly tracked down several miles away and shot and killed by either a U.S. Marshal or by the rancher that he was stealing horses from. And they actually never capture Ahud. He disappears and is never seen or heard from again.
It took 5 years to get a 12-foot fence, another 3 years for a new cell house, and by 1894, they had completed the wall and the administration building.
And that doubled the capacity, but quickly realized that they needed more. And so by the end of that decade, by 1899, they started construction on the cell house that we're actually in right now, and they completed this in 1911.
In 1942, that original single cell house had been converted to a chapel.
And it doesn't look that big to hold, 80 men in this structure. Yeah, in the 1880s, it's disheartening to think of that overpopulation and how tough life in here would have been.
By 1954, with the maximum security cell block built, the penitentiary was at capacity in both buildings and jailbirds.
After the 1950s, just over 600.
And those close quarters could lead to questionable conditions.
The conditions, they could be harsh.
And they could lead to riots.
Just wanting to make a statement so that people in the community would know what the conditions were like in here. But 1973, in March, there's a major riot, the final major riot at the institution, and several buildings are burned, including that chapel, the territorial prison.
The prisoners intended to torch the dining hall, not the chapel, but the damage was done. By the end of the year, the old penitentiary was closed.
Early history,
Oh yeah, remember that cornerstone?
So they go around with metal detectors in each of these buildings, and finally it pings right here.
Well, it contained a time capsule, which wasn't discovered until 1970.
They said it was one of the best kept time capsules in early history of Boise, of territorial Idaho. So it's an amazing discovery that they had, and it's a really an amazing part of our collection.
Almost as amazing as the collection of stories still housed here.
150 years that this institution has been around, and people can still come in and see this artifact and this part of our history.
A couple other numbers to share about the history of the Old Idaho Pen. There were more than 13,000 inmates housed there over the 101 years it was in use. And there were more than 500 escape attempts during that time. 90 of them were like Ahmud and were successful, which is a pretty decent rate of return. There were 10 executions performed at the Old Pen. All were hanged, but only one took place in the modern maximum security building built in the 1950s. The rest were done on a wooden scaffold in the yard. In 1974, the Idaho State Historical Society took over the Idaho State Penitentiary and began offering tours of the place. And they do events like on Halloween and Valentine's Day. And tonight, there will be a celebration of its 150 years. It starts at 6 with presentations beginning at 6:30. And your $6 donation will get you in and out in a matter of hours, unlike the previous inhabitants. All right, last week, we expressed our affiliation with the College of Idaho men's basketball team, the Coyotes, and their historic season unfortunately came to an end Saturday morning. They're in the NAIA tournament and doing well, but then they lost 53-60 to #1 Loyola of New Orleans in the final 8 of that championship tournament. The Yotes posted a 32-5 record on the year, so a big congratulations is out to them because they certainly earned it. All right, let's get to your comments. This one sent in from Lynn. This is the cutout of the longer one she sent that explained how stressful the year has been, couple of years have been during the pandemic with the shortage of substitute teachers, all the COVID protocols that they all have to deal with. So yeah, maybe the legislators need to do our jobs for a week and we'll do theirs and probably get more done than they do, she says. Takes a lot of nerve for legislators to say education administrators are not worth a bonus for doing their jobs when they are not doing theirs, says Scott, kind of the same sentiment. $1.9 billion surplus, we still can't adequately fund higher education. Doesn't sound like investing for the future, says Jack. This one here, if someone can't get their ducks in a row enough to file the proper paperwork by the deadline, should they really be governor, asked Karen. It's a very good question. We'll see you back here tomorrow.